Grocery stores don't usually close because people stop buying food. They close when entire neighborhoods stop being profitable to serve. Across the United States, major chains are quietly pulling out of cities, leaving behind blocks where fresh food simply disappears. This isn't about inconvenience or higher prices. It's about access. When grocery stores leave, families travel farther, pay more, and eat worse. And the cities where this is happening fastest aren't random. They're places where rising costs, shrinking margins, and growing inequality are colliding in ways that most people won't notice until the shelves are already empty. Grocery stores rarely disappear overnight. They retreat slowly, one location at a time, after years of rising costs and shrinking margins. When they leave, the damage doesn't show up immediately. Shelves are still stocked somewhere else. People adjust. They travel farther. They pay more. But over time, those adjustments become permanent disadvantages. By 2026, grocery store closures are no longer isolated incidents. They are concentrated in specific cities where operating costs, theft losses, declining foot traffic, and uneven income distribution collide. These cities aren't running out of people. They're running out of profitable customers. We begin at number 10. Number 10, Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland's grocery store problem isn't about population collapse. It's about imbalance. Large portions of the city are already classified as food deserts, where residents must travel significant distances to reach a full-service grocery store. Rising operating costs have pushed several chains to reduce their footprint, consolidating stores into fewer locations. For grocery companies, Cleveland presents a difficult equation. Lower average household incomes limit pricing flexibility. Theft losses and security expenses have increased. Labor and utility costs continue to rise. When margins shrink, stores quietly close or relocate to nearby suburbs where purchasing power is stronger. For residents, the impact is immediate. Public transportation becomes essential just to buy food. Prices rise due to limited competition. Convenience stores fill the gap, but at higher costs and lower nutritional value. Cleveland isn't losing grocery stores because people don't need food. It's losing them because the math no longer works. Number 9. St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis faces a similar challenge, but with sharper geographic inequality. Grocery chains have steadily withdrawn from inner-city neighborhoods while expanding in surrounding counties. The city itself is left with fewer full-service options, forcing residents to travel farther for basic necessities. Operating costs in St. Louis have increased while foot traffic in some neighborhoods has declined. Shrink losses and security expenses make certain locations unsustainable. For grocery companies, closing a store isn't controversial. It's framed as a business decision. For residents, it reshapes daily life. Elderly populations, low-income households, and families without reliable transportation are hit hardest. Food access becomes a logistical problem rather than a routine task. St. Louis illustrates how grocery closures don't follow population size. They follow profitability. Number 8. New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans' grocery crisis is driven by fragility. The city relies heavily on tourism and service sector employment, which creates unstable income patterns across many neighborhoods. Grocery stores operating on thin margins face rising insurance costs, higher labor expenses, and unpredictable demand. Hurricanes and climate-related risks further complicate operations. Insurance premiums for commercial properties have surged, adding another layer of cost. Several grocery chains have downsized or exited specific neighborhoods, consolidating locations into higher income areas. For residents, this means longer travel times, fewer options, and higher prices. Neighborhoods that already struggle with affordability face compounded pressure as food access becomes limited. New Orleans isn't losing grocery stores because demand vanished. It's losing them because volatility has made stability impossible. Number 7. Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis has one of the highest food insecurity rates among large U.S. cities, and grocery store closures are accelerating that reality. Many neighborhoods rely on a small number of stores. When even one closes, the effect ripples outward immediately. Remaining stores become overcrowded. Prices rise. Selection shrinks. For grocery chains, Memphis presents rising labor costs without matching revenue growth. Theft losses and property maintenance costs have increased. Operating margins are thin. Rather than invest further, companies reduce exposure. The result is a city where food access depends heavily on zip code. Higher income areas retain options. Lower income neighborhoods lose them. Memphis shows how grocery closures don't create food deserts. They deepen ones that already exist. Number 6. Detroit, Michigan. Detroit's grocery challenges are long-standing, but by 2026 they've entered a new phase. Despite revitalization in certain districts, large portions of the city remain underserved. Grocery stores that once operated as anchors have closed or relocated, citing low profitability and high operating costs. Detroit's population density doesn't guarantee grocery viability. Lower disposable income, combined with high logistics and security expenses, erodes margins. For residents, access often requires long travel times or reliance on smaller stores with limited selection and higher prices. Detroit highlights a critical truth. Grocery stores follow purchasing power, not population. And when purchasing power concentrates unevenly, access disappears unevenly. The cities at the bottom of this list share a common pattern. Grocery stores aren't leaving because people don't eat. They're leaving because serving entire neighborhoods has become financially unsustainable under current conditions. Once stores close, they rarely return. Infrastructure decays. Consumer habits change. Supply chains reroute. The economics that caused the closure remain in place. And as we move higher on this list, the situation becomes more alarming. Not because the cities are poorer, but because they're wealthier. The next cities aren't losing grocery stores due to long-term decline. They're losing them despite growth. By the time grocery store closures reach this stage, the explanation can no longer be reduced to long-term decline or population loss. The next cities on this list are growing, attracting investment, and expanding economically. Yet grocery access is still shrinking. This is where the crisis becomes harder to ignore. Number 5. Chicago, Illinois. Chicago's grocery store problem isn't happening everywhere at once. It's happening unevenly. Major chains continue to operate in affluent neighborhoods and downtown districts while pulling out of large sections of the South and West Sides. These areas aren't empty, they're densely populated, but they're expensive to serve and increasingly difficult to operate in profitably. Rising labor costs, higher security expenses, and persistent shrink losses have pushed margins to the breaking point. Grocery stores that once functioned as neighborhood anchors now represent financial risk. When a store closes in Chicago, the gap it leaves behind isn't easily filled. Smaller grocers struggle to scale. Convenience stores step in, but at higher prices and lower nutritional quality. Residents often travel miles to reach the nearest full-service grocery store. For households without reliable transportation, food access becomes a daily challenge rather than a routine task. Chicago shows how food deserts can exist inside one of the largest, wealthiest cities in the country, not because of abandonment, but because profitability has become selective. Number 4. Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore's grocery closures reflect a deeper structural issue. The city has made repeated efforts to attract and retain grocery stores in underserved neighborhoods. Incentives have been offered, public-private partnerships have been attempted, yet closures continue. Operating costs keep rising. Labor shortages persist. Theft and property maintenance expenses add pressure. For grocery chains, the risk profile often outweighs the potential reward. When stores leave, residents are left with limited alternatives. Public transportation becomes essential just to buy groceries. Food prices rise as competition disappears. Baltimore's situation highlights a critical flaw in how food access is treated. Grocery stores are expected to solve systemic inequality on their own, but they are private businesses operating on thin margins. When those margins disappear, access disappears with them. Number 3, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia's grocery store closures are occurring alongside economic growth, not decline. Certain neighborhoods have seen rising rents, increased development, and population growth. Yet grocery access has not kept pace. In fact, it has worsened in some areas. Large chains have closed underperforming locations, citing rising costs and shrinking profitability. New stores open selectively, often targeting higher-income areas where pricing power is stronger. This creates a fragmented city. Some residents enjoy abundant grocery options within walking distance. Others must travel far for basic necessities. The divide follows income lines more than population density. Philadelphia illustrates how growth doesn't guarantee access. When profitability determines placement, grocery stores cluster where margins are strongest, leaving gaps elsewhere. The result is a city where food access depends heavily on zip code. Number 2, Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles presents one of the most concerning grocery store patterns in the country. The city is massive, wealthy, and densely populated. Yet grocery store closures continue, particularly in lower-income and high-cost neighborhoods. Operating a grocery store in Los Angeles has become increasingly expensive. Commercial rents are high. Labor costs are among the highest in the nation. Utilities and insurance add additional pressure. At the same time, consumer behavior has shifted. Smaller, frequent trips replace large weekly shopping. Delivery services capture some demand, but not enough to offset rising costs for brick-and-mortar stores. When grocery stores close in Los Angeles, the scale of impact is enormous. Entire neighborhoods lose access. Remaining stores become overcrowded. Prices rise as competition shrinks. Los Angeles demonstrates a critical truth. Even in cities with enormous consumer demand, grocery stores will retreat if the cost structure becomes unsustainable, a pattern that can't be ignored. At this point in the list, the pattern is unmistakable. Grocery stores are not closing only in struggling cities. They are closing in major metropolitan areas, with growing populations and expanding economies. The common thread is margin pressure. Labor costs rise. Rent increases. Insurance becomes more expensive. Theft and logistics add risk. When combined, these factors make certain neighborhoods unprofitable, regardless of need. Once grocery stores leave, they rarely return quickly. Infrastructure shifts. Consumer habits change. Supply chains reroute. Food access becomes a permanent problem rather than a temporary disruption. And as we move to the final city on this list, the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. The number 1 city isn't poor, it isn't shrinking, it isn't overlooked. It's one of the wealthiest, most influential cities in the country. And it's still losing grocery stores. When wealth can't protect food access, by the time grocery store closures reach this point, the issue is no longer misunderstood. It's undeniable. The final city on this list isn't struggling in the traditional sense. It isn't shrinking. It isn't poor. It isn't forgotten. It sits at the center of wealth, innovation, and influence. Yet grocery access is still breaking down. That contradiction is what makes this city the most alarming example of all. Number 1. San Francisco, California. San Francisco should not be losing grocery stores. It is one of the richest cities in the world. Median incomes are high. Consumer demand is strong. The population is educated, densely concentrated, and willing to pay premium prices. On paper, it should be one of the safest grocery markets in the country. And yet, By 2026, major grocery chains continue to close locations across the city. This isn't happening because people stopped buying food. It's happening because the cost of operating a grocery store in San Francisco has become extraordinarily high, even by luxury market standards. Commercial rents are among the highest in the nation. Labor costs exceed national averages. Utilities, insurance, and compliance costs add layers of expense that compound quickly. On top of that, shrink losses have become a major factor, forcing companies to invest heavily in security just to protect inventory. When all of these costs converge, even Strong's sales volumes can fail to produce acceptable margins. Grocery companies don't measure success by revenue alone. They measure it by profitability per square foot. In San Francisco, that calculation has turned against them in certain neighborhoods. As a result, chains quietly pull out. Some close permanently. Others reduce store size or hours. Some shift locations toward higher income districts where pricing power is stronger and risk is lower. For residents, the impact is profound. Entire neighborhoods lose walkable access to fresh food. Remaining stores become crowded. Prices rise as competition disappears. For elderly residents, families without cars, and people working multiple jobs, grocery shopping becomes a logistical challenge instead of a routine activity. This is how food deserts form in cities that should never have them. San Francisco reveals the true nature of the grocery crisis. It is not a problem of demand. It is a problem of economics. When operating costs exceed sustainable margins, even the wealthiest markets lose access. The story across these 10 cities points to a larger reality. Grocery stores are not leaving because communities don't matter. They are leaving because the current economic structure makes serving certain neighborhoods unviable. Food access is being shaped by profitability, not necessity. Once a grocery store closes, the damage extends far beyond inconvenience. Local economies weaken, health outcomes worsen, household costs rise. Time becomes a hidden tax, especially for those who can least afford it. And these closures rarely reverse. When stores shut down, supply chains adjust. Consumer habits change, infrastructure erodes. The conditions that caused the closure remain in place. This is why grocery store closures should not be viewed as isolated business decisions. They are early indicators of deeper structural stress. They show where costs have overtaken access. They show where inequality has become operational. They show where daily survival is becoming more expensive, more time-consuming, and more fragile. What makes this crisis especially dangerous is how quietly it unfolds. There are no mass layoffs, no dramatic announcements, no immediate shortages. Food still exists, just farther away, more expensive, and harder to reach. People adapt, they always do. They drive longer distances. They shop less frequently. They rely on smaller stores. They pay higher prices. They compromise on quality. But adaptation has limits. Over time, these adjustments erode health, finances, and stability. They compound existing inequalities. They strain communities already under pressure. And because grocery access is foundational, everything else is affected. Work becomes harder when food is harder to obtain. Health suffers when nutrition declines. Families spend more time and money just to maintain basic routines. This is why grocery stores matter far beyond retail. They are infrastructure. When infrastructure fails selectively, society fragments. The warning most people miss. The cities on this list are not anomalies. They are early signals. What's happening in Cleveland, St. Louis, New Orleans, Memphis, Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and San Francisco is not isolated. It reflects a broader shift in how essential services are distributed in modern cities. Access is becoming conditional, not based on need, not based on population, but based on profitability. As costs rise and margins shrink, more neighborhoods fall outside that calculation. And once they do, access doesn't return easily. The most troubling part isn't that grocery stores are closing, it's that the system accepts it. Food access is quietly reclassified as a market outcome rather than a social necessity. Communities adjust individually instead of collectively. The crisis spreads without ever being named. By the time it becomes visible, the damage is already embedded. This is why grocery store closures matter. They are not just about food. They are about who gets served, who gets left behind, and how quietly that line is being redrawn across America's cities.